Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Foley. I'm the managing editor of Philipstown.Info and our weekly print publication, the paper. Before we get started with our proceedings tonight, we would like to take a moment of silence in memory of Betty Budney, who anyone who's been involved with civic and political and volunteer life in this town has had an opportunity to cross paths with Betty Budney. And I think there's a very large consensus of people who would see her as a real example of civic life lived well. I know that at our organization we've had many opportunities to interview and witness Betty's long service to her community. So please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Betty's passing adds to the sense of the .Info staff, sense of melancholy in having this forum tonight. Those of you who follow our forums in the past know that this is the first time that we have had a candidates forum without our founder, Gordon Stewart, presiding. And those of you who knew Gordon knew he relished the role of conducting the forums and interacting with the candidates and the citizenry. So we, in many discussions with Gordon before he died, promised him that we would carry on the various traditions that he had established in creating our organization. So tonight's forum is very much a discussion with, but also among the candidates, without particular time limits on any one subject being discussed. We have, as you've noticed, broken up the discussion tonight between, or among in this case, the trustee candidates first. We'll go on for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have the two mayoral candidates. We did that in part because it's an easier discussion having 3 and 2, and there's also a difference in the roles between just the trustees and the mayor's role being somewhat different. We thought it was an opportunity to explore the issues a little better. We have this time changed a little bit of the format of how we will conduct the forum tonight, adding a little bit of a meet the press element, if you will, into the proceeding. And joining me to ask some of the questions tonight is my award-winning colleague, Mike Turton, who has spent many years covering every aspect of village life, including, of course, the Board of Trustees. It was our feeling in preparing for the forum that there is a pretty good list of issues that are uniquely in the purview of the trustees of the village. And many of these issues, as I'm sure we'll discuss tonight, have been percolating for some time. They involve very serious challenges of a financial and planning nature. And we wanted to make sure, as two people who have spent a lot of time going to a lot of the meetings discussing these issues, that as many of those issues could be explored and what the candidates, beyond their aspirations for public service, what they might have to say specifically about how we can approach these problems so that perhaps a year from now we can measure the progress of those who were elected after the proceedings tonight. So with that, I will ask each of the candidates to make a brief opening statement. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and why you're running for public office. And we'll start with Bob Ferris right here.
Good evening. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I know it's cold, but I appreciate it. My name is Bob Ferris. I've lived in the community for 35 years. I live on Constitution Drive with my wife and daughter and 3 other children. I work for the Putnam County Sheriff's Office as a criminal investigator. I've been there for 34 years. And I'm running for trustee because I've seen what's not going on in the village, and living in the village and walking the streets in the village, we need to get some things done and bring it to a new level. The heart and soul of the village, I think, is kind of broken right now and it needs some repair. And I think with the right board, we can make the village a better place. And we have a beautiful community here, probably one of the most beautiful spots on the Hudson River, maybe in the world. You know, you travel around and you come back to Cold Spring and look at the mountains and you're like, why did I even have to go away? You know, this is it, this is the place. So I want to bring my experience and expertise and try and work with the board, work as a team, and listen to the people, resolve some of the issues. There's a lot of quality of life stuff that needs to be taken care of. There's a lot of larger issues, and I want to work to complete those jobs and tasks for myself and the people of the community.
Thanks. Fran Murphy?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you also for coming this evening. I appreciate you all coming out. This is a great crowd. I want to also thank Kevin and Mike for hosting us this evening and giving us a chance to speak about our views. As you all know, or you should know, I'm not a Springer. As most of you know, I was born in Boston, and we won't talk sports tonight. But I do bring to you over 40 years of business experience, from accounting and international business to my last position, which I retired from in July of 2012, which was the Director of Graduate Admissions at the Business School at Baruch College. I bring experience in management, both of staff and of projects, data analysis and decision-making, and a history of meeting goals and getting the job done. I have a reputation of diligently analyzing the numbers and reporting the facts. I'm running because I wanted to be involved in the village. Being involved means, you know, it's time to stop complaining about what's going on. It's time to start doing something. After I retired, I realized that now I have time to do it. Working, I did not have that time. The first thing I did, because I felt I didn't know enough about the village, was I walked into the office and asked Mary Sari if she needed help, and explained to her that I wanted to volunteer. And so I've been there for about a year, a couple of days a week, doing some work, whatever Mary needed, and also listening and finding out what's going on. I've also recently been appointed to the Recreation Committee in the village. As Bob said, and as Kevin said, we do have a lot of issues in the village, and solving these is not going to be easy. We're going to get some solved. We're not going to get them all solved. Some of them aren't going to be done right away. In the process of us getting these solved, some of you will be happy and a lot of you will be angry with us. But we'll work together and we will get things done for the good of the village. The new board needs to work as a team. I've talked about teamwork for a long time. One of the things that we need to do is to plan for the future. So hopefully the new board will get together and look into capital planning for the future, so that we're not just patching up problems as they come across, but looking at and planning for what's coming ahead, so that we know what we have to plan for. We know, you know, that we need new police cars and fire trucks and so on and so forth, and we'll get into that. But planning for the future and having a capital plan that goes on a regular basis, I think, is a big part of what we need. When I become trustee, I will promise to you that I'll work hard and I'll do research on the subjects that we're asked to look at. I'll speak with the experts, I'll get the facts, and I'll work with the board members to move things forward. And because I feel that we can prevent a lot of misinformation and a lot of anger by letting you know what's going on, I'll speak with you and I'll let you I'll make sure that you're informed. I'm grateful for all the support I have received so far as I've walked through the village. I look forward to serving you on the Board of Trustees for many years to come. Thank you.
Marie.
My name is Mayoral, and I'd also like to thank you all for coming and for hosting. My parents were born in the village, as was I, at Butterfield. I was raised here. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. My professional training is as a systems programmer with IBM. I worked at IBM in Poughkeepsie, Kingston, Cary, North Carolina, and Bethesda, Maryland. After retiring from IBM, I took a job with Morgan Stanley in New York City, where I was manager of referential market data. Upon retirement, I returned back to Cold Spring and began doing some volunteer work with the village on various village boards, not the village board, but on various boards for the village, such as the special board. I was asked to join the Historic District Review Board. I moved from there to the zoning board that I'm now chairing. And lastly, I'm on the Code Update Committee. I care very deeply about the village. With my skills, professional experience, and history of dedication to the village, I feel that I can make an even greater contribution as a trustee.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Okay, Marie, we're gonna have you lead off,
Okay.
since you're already warmed up. What we would like each of the candidates to do is talk about one high priority issue, a high priority on your list, personal list, as well as something you think that's very important to the village. So identify one of your top picks as a priority and give us a sense of what you think has to be done in order to address that issue, and also some indication of what might indicate success as you're working through that issue as a board.
I think the biggest problem facing the village right now are the myriad capital improvements that, I'm getting a signal. Am I supposed to walk out the door or something? No, just ignore it? Okay. The myriad of capital improvements that are facing the village today. I think the first task there is, and by the way, I believe some informal estimates have put the total cost in the $10 million range for a village whose budget is $1.5 million. That's a daunting task. So what I would say is the first priority is to prioritize the capital improvements that are necessary. And then to begin searching for alternative methods or sources of revenue. Certainly a grants committee would be a good first step. Talking to our neighboring communities to see how they have obtained additional money, revenues, to do the projects that they have accomplished in their communities. I would reach out to our county, state, and federal representatives to engage them and potentially capture their attention as a partner in finding additional sources of revenue for our capital projects. Another aspect of this is what can we do to decrease our current expenditures, such as sharing projects, sharing services with neighboring communities. I mentioned a grants committee. I think it doesn't have to be a committee, it could be a task force, it could be a working group, but I would call upon the skills and expertise of the enormous amount of residents that our residents have in this community. I'm astounded by how creative our population is, and I think they would be very willing to work with us to accomplish some of those goals. And I think that's what I would do.
If I can follow up with just one aspect, a number of the capital projects, the village really has no choice but to do. Leaky water mains have to be fixed, just like a leaky roof has to be fixed at home. Other projects are more optional. Which of the optional projects do you think are really high in your list?
Why don't you put me on the spot? The ones that do not involve the safety of our residents, the immediate safety of our residents, is what I would say. I would defer. I wouldn't call them optional. I would defer their implementation. So, for example, we haven't talked about it yet, but one of the fire safety issues facing the village is the ability, and I'm borrowing from Mike Armstrong here, the ability to provide the NFF for this building. The NFF for this building is not adequate.
And the NFF is?
Needed fire flow. So the amount of water coming down, I believe the water main goes down Cedar Street, that water main is not sufficient with the pressure necessary to fight a fire in this building. This building doesn't have sprinkler systems. The high school building does, but this building doesn't. So we have our most precious resource, our little children here. So I would say, when I say take a look at all of the projects, you might assume that the fire house is a lower priority, but fire safety, which is a bigger aspect of the firehouse, I might put that high on the list, along with the dams. I don't think we want the dams collapsing. So, does that answer your question?
We're getting there.
Okay.
Next up is Fran, and we'll keep the same order each time. We'll just vary who starts first. So, Fran, can you pick out a real high priority issue from your list, and what would be involved with addressing it, and how might you measure success?
I'm going to piggyback on something Marie said and also something I said when I started. I believe this village and our board needs to have some capital plans for the future. It may not be a priority for now, but we will not be in this situation if we were planning on a regular basis and if we know what's coming up the pike. I've had conversations with the water commissioner, and I've had conversations with the highway people. They know, for example, when their equipment is due to mature, when it's due and needs to be replaced. We need to know that. We need to be able to plan in advance and budget for that. So while it may not be an urgent priority at this point, if we don't get that done, we're going to be constantly plugging dams and plugging holes in the dams. So I think that is something, and I think on a regular basis, we can get the heads of our departments to come and tell us, when are the trucks going to, I need a new truck next year, this one's gonna last 5 years, I need, Greg will tell you which equipment in the entire water and dam system, and he took me on a tour of the entire system. He knows what lasts 12 years and what lasts 15 years and what's due to be replaced. We need to know those things. And then going back to the revenue sources, we need to then be able to figure out where the money's coming from. A grant team would be wonderful, but I think also in regards to that, we need to be very careful. We need to, this may sound, that not make some people happy, but we can't have any sacred cows anymore. We have $10 billion worth of capital projects in a very small budget, and so we need to look at everything that we think is precious for whatever reason. And granted, I wasn't born here, so I'm not as precious. But I can tell you from my history, my grammar school, my high school, my college are all gone. I mean, they were precious to me, but they're gone. And things do move on. We need to be able to not to look at everything, to analyze everything, to figure out where we're going to get the funding. Looking at the town, the county, and the state, and asking and asking and asking and continually asking, and then asking somebody else and asking in a different way will eventually get us maybe the answers that we need. On a more sort of down-to-earth level or everyday level, everyone I've talked to, and some of you know that I have been passing around questionnaires, and they're online, and I'm asking for information on what's important to you. And I don't have a large sample yet, but every questionnaire that I've gotten back has told me sidewalks is a major issue. And it's not just sidewalks on Main Street, it's sidewalks throughout the village, right? You all know that Main Street, is in the process. We have a grant coming through. It's moving slowly, granted. But Main Street sidewalks need to be fixed, but so do sidewalks throughout the village. That, in itself is something that we need to look at on a regular basis. If it were a situation, one of my friends who was born here and who's been here for a million years told me that in the old days, and I love when people say in the old days, but in the old days, the Board of Trustees, every year the Highway Department had a section or a street or a sidewalk that they were going to repair. And it was an ongoing process that happened all the time. What happened to something as simple as that would keep us going?
Quick follow-up. You've identified a number of issues as your favorite issue. How would the village board decide what is number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in your view?
Did I have 5?
Well,
I don't remember having 5. I think that there can't be a number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I think some of them we have to work on together at the same time. I don't see any reason why we can't begin looking at capital budgeting at the same time we're looking at let's get the sidewalks done. It doesn't have to necessarily be we do them one at a time. There's got to be 5 people on the board. Each of us, I think, should have a mandate that says, this is your project, this is the one that you have to follow, report on, make sure it gets done, get back to us if you need our help, we'll do it. We can't all be working on the same thing, but we should all have a project that we can work on. For example, the sidewalks. For example, whatever needs to be done for Butterfield. If my project is the sidewalks, I'll manage the rest of the grant. I'll be on the phone all the time. But there's 5 of us. We need to divide it up so there won't be a number 1 and number 2. We don't have time for that. there's just a lot of issues coming through that need to be done, and some at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Fran. Bob, are you going to follow the capital projects trend, or what do you see as one of your highest priorities as a project, and how would you address it?
Well, my highest priority, number one, is to have the proper team in place. Because without the proper team, we're gonna continue to get nothing done. So my priority coming in is to get the board together, everybody sit down, look at what's broken, and we've all been around, we all kind of know what's broken. Make sure that the proper team is in place, because without proper management, nothing's gonna get done. It'll be like it is, and people have to be held accountable for things that are not being done in our village. On a priority issue, there's money sitting in the bank, if you want to say, to fix a large part of Main Street and the sidewalks and the curbing for handicaps. And that's been, I believe, since around 2006, that money's been available, and we're still where we were back then without proper curbing. We need more handicap parking spaces. Parking is a priority for me. I am on the parking committee, and parking in the village is just crazy. And that needs to be addressed and worked on. And to have the whole board really to work together, and when you're doing a job, do the job together and actually get the job done so we can move on to the next task or job at hand. The other big issue for me is coming up is the cleanup down at the boat clubs. There's a lot of miscommunication with everybody in the community. I don't know if two sides even know exactly the facts. I want to make sure that there's meetings with the boat club and the village and the people, so we're all informed and educated on what's going to happen down there, because that's a large project, and it's contaminations that's in the ground. So I want to make sure that we all know what's going on down there and what's going to happen in the future with the boat club and the property and the riverfront.
What would you see as a successful conclusion to the boat club project then? How would you measure success down there?
I think it's going to be hard to say until the cleanup is done and we get to look at what it looks like after they're finished. I don't know if it's going to be a nice big hill. It's going to, so we got to see what it looks like. I don't know how far, where they're going to stop. I know there's a lot of plans in place to where they're going to go. I want to see what it looks like when it's done. And while that's being done, we need to communicate and we need to figure out the plan of what it's going to look like when it's done, what the boat club can do or cannot do, what the village can do, and everybody work together so we can all make that property that's going to be nice and clean so we can all utilize it.
Okay, thanks. We'll start this question with Fran. The village has spent years of time and research and planning and money and garnered a great deal of community input to develop a comprehensive plan for the village, and is also in the final stages of developing a strategy for local waterfront revitalization. Just wondering if you favor a more focused implementation of that plan, should you be elected as a trustee, and how do you think the village can best go about more aggressively implementing the comprehensive plan?
I have looked over the comprehensive plan, I've read it. I won't say I've read it in depth, but I have read it. And I take it as objectives and recommendations. Objectives, excuse me, and recommendations. And recommendations are what they are. I realize there were 5 years and a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of people's input, which I think is one of the things that we need more often, is the input of the villagers. And those who wrote the comprehensive plan and all the committees that did it got input from a lot of people. I still understand the comprehensive plan to be a guideline for things, not, as somebody said to me a couple of weeks ago when I was meeting with them, this is what the law is. It is not the law. It's guidelines for us to consider. For example, from what I understand in the comprehensive plan, it recommends that the firehouse stay on Main Street. That's not a law. That's something we should consider because the people think that's a nice place to have the firehouse. Whether or not, in reality, that makes sense in terms of how much it's going to cost for us to do that or not do that, we have to be realistic about it. So I think as we're looking on implementing the comprehensive plan as much as we can, looking at each section. Some of it has already been implemented, some of it, we've already moved on, and some of it is still to be determined. But it's a good guideline for us to deal with, because we know that when this was done, this was the will of the people. This was everybody came, they had umpteen million meetings, I won't say umpteen million, but that wasn't to be derogatory, they had a lot of meetings. And I know that there was a lot of input and a lot of time and effort to write this, so we know that that was the feel of the people at the time. That's a while ago. It needs to be our guideline, because if we don't have guidelines, then we can't move forward with these issues. But I still think it's something that we should look at, something that we should consider. We should implement as much of it as we feel that we can, and we should not be feeling that we're constricted by the comprehensive plan, and if we feel at this point in time that that's not a good thing to do in a particular issue.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Comprehensive plan? Thoughts?
Try and follow the plan, but Cold Spring's changing, and it's changing quickly. We're getting more and more people into the village on weekends, the hikers, emergency services. So I think the comprehensive plan is good, but we have to look at it, update it, maybe make some revisions for what it needs and calls for today. Our village on a weekend, as you know, we're inundated with tourists. I think that Cold Spring is probably the #1 tourist location in Putnam County. And, we need to work on that. We need to get into the 21st century where we can get some, where Cold Spring is today, not where it was a few years ago. So I want to bring Cold Spring up to the future, where it should be.
What would be one quick example of Cold Spring 2015 that it needs to be?
Beautify Main Street, make Main Street look like Main Street USA, small town USA. That's real big for me, is walking on a weekend and seeing garbage on the streets, the sidewalks, we can go on the riverfront, the garbage cans are overflowing. Just quality of life, just to beautify Cold Spring. All the wires that are all across Main Street, a lot of those wires are all old phone lines and stuff, and just update and move along and try and progress and bite at it a little bit at a time, because we're never going to get the whole apple at one shot.
Okay, thanks. Marie, thoughts on the comprehensive plan, which I'm just guessing you have a few.
I do have a few. The comprehensive plan originally had 2 recommendations in it. One was to have annual reviews by the village board, sort of a report list on how the village was doing relative to the recommendations in the comprehensive plan. The second element in the comprehensive plan was to form a comprehensive plan work group, a committee, who would take the recommendations in the comprehensive plan and work toward getting them implemented. Neither of those 2 recommendations remain in the adopted comprehensive plan. I would like to see them implemented. Obviously, I've put a lot of effort into the comprehensive plan along with other residents who worked on that special board. The comprehensive plan was followed by the LWRS, or the Local Waterfront Revitalization Strategy, which updated the comprehensive plan and provided more concrete recommendations and specific examples of what the village could do to realize the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. The LWRS was then followed by the LWRP, or the Local Waterfront Revitalization Plan. That project stopped until we could obtain funds to do a major village code update. Those funds have now been received in the form of the NYSERDA grant, and there exists now the Code Update Committee, which is looking at the entire village code as a whole and identifying what changes need to be made to the village code, which was originally implemented in 1967, and which could stand some significant changes. So the Code Update Committee is looking at the recommendations from the comprehensive plan and the LWRS, specifically the land and water use section of the LWRS. It has the Code Committee has broken up the recommendations into 3 distinct groups. We're working on the first group, which are standards. We've gone through permitted uses and a few other topics. So I believe that project, the Code Update Committee, is definitely the right step to getting to the full realization of the comprehensive plan, which will be an adopted LWRP. So the two concrete suggestions for the village board is for the village board to issue an annual report card on its progress in implementing the comprehensive plan, and number two, forming a comprehensive plan committee, who sort of a watchdog group, which will be responsible for identifying ways, projects, tools that the village can implement to see the full realization of the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thanks. Mike?
Well, just about everything mentioned so far costs money in one form or another, especially the capital projects. And one way to fund those projects is to increase revenue, as has been mentioned. I think, Bob, you're up first on this one. What are your ideas for increasing revenue, aside from increasing taxes, unless you want to recommend increasing taxes?
Not a good idea tonight.
And specifically, what do you think about metered parking as a potential source of new revenue? First question first, so your general thoughts on how might revenue be increased in the village, and then your view on parking meters.
General thoughts first. To increase revenue in a village is kind of difficult without taxing people, and surely I don't want to be taxed and no one else does. But there are some ways that we might be able to generate some revenue, and one of them is parking. And on the parking committee, we are looking at areas where there would be metered parking in the village. It's very difficult, it's unique because we have one-way streets and people don't want to have meters, but with our tourism that comes into town, we have a lot of vehicle traffic, and it needs to be addressed as a quality of life issue for a resident. I don't know if you tried to stop anywhere on Main Street on the weekend to go in one of the stores, there's no way you're going to get a parking spot. So we want to find areas. We have a municipal lot on Fair Street that's not utilized. Everybody parks there from Maine to Florida, and we want to utilize that lot. We're looking at putting meters in that section, so when people come into town, we can direct them to those areas. The MTA lot is also a parking area, and we'd like to look at a couple other spots in town where we might be able to put in metered parking. I think, and I feel that we should be getting more money from the county, from tourism, because we're taking a big hit, the village of Cold Spring, with the tourists. And I'm not quite sure how much the village can sustain without industry and raising taxes and all the things that need to be fixed. And there's no money right now to fix a lot of these things. So there's not too many ways of that I think that we can raise revenue other than raising taxes, and that's not happening on my tax book. So that's it.
So I'm going to have a brief flashback to Assertiveness Training 101, and I am going to ask each of you for a yes, no, or undecided yet on parking meters. And I didn't quite understand where you were going with the meters, Bob. Are you for, against, or undecided at this point?
Well, I'm for meters in the right areas. We're also working right now, which is a very long process with the parking committee, on resident parking permits. The only place, and this is state mandated, the state has to approve it, is below the tracks. Many years ago, they were given parking permits for residents. And we don't have that up here on our streets. And we want to get the commuters to park where they belong, and if they have to pay to park, and they have to pay the village to park so they can go to the city for the day, as like other places, that's where we would need meters. But meters everywhere in a village that's not the answer.
Thank you. Who's up next here? Marie, I guess, on revenue, possible sources of revenue, and then your thoughts on the metering specifically.
When I spoke about my what was the biggest problem facing the village as the capital projects, and I identified some possible methods of raising money. and those included a grants committee working with our county, state, and federal representatives so that they would join with us, partner with us, to look for opportunities for raising money to fund capital projects. I would agree with Bob. I would not be for raising taxes, raising village taxes. I think that it would be great if we could do something like tax every hiker as they go through the village, but I realize that's not going to happen. So maybe we could have a turnstile at the end of Fair Street so that people would have to pay. That's, obviously I'm joking about that. But we do have a huge influx of visitors on weekends. If there were some way that we could capitalize on that and generate some sort of revenue, I don't see how, but I can't imagine that people in the village don't have some ideas about that. So I would be interested in if people might have some creative ideas about how we might be able to make money that way. The second part of your question was, how do I feel about parking? I am not in favor of meters, but I would not condemn them quite yet. I agree with what Bob said. There is, I believe, the parking problem that has been expressed is a weekend Main Street parking problem. We will find it very difficult to find a parking spot on Main Street on weekends. During the week, there's not a problem. And I believe there has been significant investigation into this. People apparently don't like to park in a spot where they can't see where they're going to. And so there's no motivator for people to go down to the municipal lot, which frequently sits somewhat empty. I know the Metro North lot on weekends is totally empty except for July 4th when we have fireworks. So maybe an approach before we do meters, maybe an approach is better signage in the village that directs people down Main Street to the Metro North parking lot or to the municipal parking lot. Maybe it's putting a sign on the side of the trolley that says, get on here to get to your car. So a creative way to get people to park off, I'm half Italian, to get people to park off of Main Street and yet get their parking, their vehicles parked within the village. So some thoughts, as far as meters are concerned, I'm not yet in favor of them.
Okay, thank you. Fran? Revenue sources and parking meters in particular.
Okay, in terms of revenue sources, I'm gonna draw on some information because I am on the Recreation Committee, and we are responsible for giving the permits to the boats that come in to the village on the foot of Main Street during the summer. And as you know, there's a lot of boats now. The nice thing about having the people come in on the boats is that they don't park on the streets, they're walking. The downside of that is that we feel that we need to raise the fees for those boats coming in. The boats come in, they pay a certain amount of money per foot for the size of the boat. We need to be competitive, but there's other things we can do. We've also discussed the fact that we may want to start charging some of the boats, even those that don't pay a lot of fees, a maintenance fee because they use our electricity and they use our bathrooms at the end of Main Street and so on and so forth. So those are issues that we've looked at. In terms of other revenue sources, the dockside property, which is, I believe, I understand and I'm sure you know, it belongs to the state. We are the stewards of that property. We have been negotiating with the state on how we can handle that property, and from what I understand, the mayor's trying to get to the point where we can use that property to gain revenue for the village, where previously there have been very tight restrictions on that. If we can actually get to the point where the state agrees and allows us to use that property and gain some revenue, there's a lot of things we could do there. We could put up a tent, we could have people, do wedding photos or whatever they want to do. There's a lot of things that possibly can be done there.
Would you, on the dockside property, favor any kind of permanent installations of any kind?
I think before we would look at a permanent installation, we need about a year of a temporary type of temporary tent, maybe porta-johns or something.
Okay.
See if it gets off the ground. Also talk to neighboring villages and neighboring towns along the river that have property like that, so that we can see what they do and how they fare with that. Eventually, if it works out, I would consider some kind of a permanent place that maybe that, you know, that we as a village could rent out to people. I know when we first moved to the village, my husband and I had our 25th anniversary down there when it was the original, whatever it was, I forget the name of it. Dockside, okay. Dockside, it was a wonderful place, that's where we had our anniversary party outside, and it was wonderful. More things like that, even if we allow the businesses in the village to lease whatever we put up there, either temporary or permanent, and then pay us back some revenues for the amount of leasing, and then they could do what they needed to do with it. The other, okay, and also obviously grants, I mean, Dockside, the boat fees, those are fine, they're not gonna make us millions of dollars that we need. Grants are another thing that we absolutely need to look at. We also need to look at sharing some resources with the town, with the other villages and stuff like that. Seeing what's available, not giving up any of the services that we have, obviously, because that's important to us, but there's gotta be a way that we can consolidate some of our you know, of our services so that we won't have to pay as much, or that we can share the resources and share the expenses. In terms of parking meters, I will get to that one. I am for parking meters to an extent. I think there needs to be some spots on Main Street that are strictly the 15-minute run in and run out type of spot. I think also that parking meters on Main Street is going to mean that there's going to be more cars parked on my street because they'll avoid the meters, so the resident stickers is an important issue. But the other thing, whether we have parking meters or we don't have parking meters, whether there's 4-hour parking or not, that needs to be policed. We need to know that if cars are parked there and there's a meter and the meter ran out, or if they're parked more than 4 hours, or if they're parked because they went to the city all day, that they need to get tickets. You know, that's not policed on a regular basis, and I understand that the consensus is that it's a weekend problem, but it isn't always a weekend problem. There are many people who will park on Main Street because they don't feel like paying to park in the Metro North lot. And so they'll park on Main Street, they'll go into the city, and they'll come home, 12 hours later, and they'll take their car off, or they'll park on the side streets. Meters on Main Street will be an issue for some of the smaller side streets, so we need to be very careful about signs that say, resident parking only, and with cars with resident stickers, because otherwise, some of the smaller streets, the residents there will have no parking at all. And I do agree with Marie that we need better signage on Main Street that directs people to, especially if we put meters, to free parking at the Metro North Station, or to parking at the lot on Fair Street, if that's free, or even if it isn't.
Okay. I want to ask one quick yes or no question. Let's give it a try. So the boat club, if things go according to what seems to be the plan, if the boat club is taken down and the DEC conducts its business with pollution control, this is village property. Would you entertain the idea that more than the boat club, possible revenue-raising opportunity could go on that property along with the boat club? Yes, sir?
That's a yes for me.
It's a yes for me.
I have to go along with my colleagues, yes.
Well, thank you all very much. That was very nice. Mike,
Might
go
be a
ahead.
first in the history of political discussions. Okay, another way to help finance projects and reduce debt is to reduce spending. And currently, the village police force is the largest single budget item, more than $400,000 annually. With Putnam County Sheriff having a substation in Nelsonville, and state police patrolling state roads in what is probably one of the lowest, certainly one of the lowest crime areas in the state, does the village need its own police force, and if so, why? And I think, Bob, you're up first on that.
First.
Is that right?
Thank you. Being in law enforcement for 34 years, living in a community, I believe we need a police department here. That's not for me personally to decide. That's not my decision. I believe that's a decision that needs to be researched. We need to talk to the public as to whether or not they want to have a police department. Their budget's over $400,000 a year. We need to look at their budget, what they're doing with it, how much revenue that the police department brings to the village. That would be from parking tickets, vehicle and traffic tickets on our roadways, I think that could be increased a lot from the police department. And to streamline them, to make them do a better job. We need training for the police department. You know, we have a drug problem in our community that's all over with heroin. Only a couple of their officers are trained in the Narcan, if you're familiar with this latest, greatest nasal spray that saves people's lives. We don't have that. We don't have a working defibrillator. We just need to bring the police department up to the 21st century where other police departments are and look at their budgets, see how the money's being spent. I'm in favor of a parking enforcement person back out on the street on weekends. So when we do have a parking issue, which a lot of times it's a quality of life issue, they're parked in a driveway or fire zone or in a roadway, that these cars get ticketed. And that could bring in revenue for the village also. So to the answer to my question, should we have a police department? Yes, we should have a police department, but the police department has to be run efficiently. Right now, they really don't answer to anyone. The mayor is the police commissioner, if people don't know that, and the police commissioner has to be in tune with the police department. They have to know what they're doing and what's going on, and accountability with the police department.
Fran?
I believe that we need a police department. I would say that we are lucky to have one. I also believe that we should look at some shared services with the sheriff's department and with the other departments around, so that we are completely covered and we're never left in a situation where we have less coverage than we currently have right now. As I was saying before, one of the comments I got back on one of the questionnaires asked for accountability for the police department, and on a regular basis, the police department, as well as all of our departments, should come before the board and give us an idea of what they're doing. People, you who are paying the taxes and who are paying these salaries have a right to know what the police department do. I mean, we see them around, we know they drive around, we know when they make an arrest, what is the rest of their day, what goes on. We need to know that. We have a right to know that. So yes, I think we do need a police department. I think, as Bob alluded to, we need some accountability. And I'm not saying that they're not doing a good job. It's just like I've said before, we don't know because we haven't heard and because we're not being told. So we have a right to know, since we're paying for it, what's going on.
Thanks, Marie.
I think the village needs police services. Whether the village needs its own police force or whether the village needs coverage from another organization that provides those services, I think needs to be investigated. I don't know what the cost would be if the sheriff were to provide police services for the village, but I think it's something that we should have available to us. Then we can make an informed decision as to whether or not the current cost of our local police department is equivalent to or more or less expensive than the equivalent services from the sheriff's department. So the question was, do we need a police department? Yes, we need police services. Who provides those, I think, is a good question, and one that should be investigated.
Okay, thanks. So what we'd like to ask you to do now is to make a closing statement. However, we have a closing statement question. So you might have your own prepared statements. Everyone seems to think that the village government could do better, and that was certainly a part of your theme this evening. How might the trustees and the mayor conduct business differently as we go forward toward accomplishing the many goals that you all have outlined this evening? So Marie, why don't we start with you and we'll work our way down the table.
Okay, I think the village board should run the village more like a business. I think the mayor should be the CEO or leader of that village. I think, for example, the various boards and committees within the village should identify their annual objectives and goals, and they should report on progress toward those objectives and goals throughout the year. I think that as I mentioned before, the village has a pool of incredibly talented and creative people, and I think the village board should take advantage of those people, using their skills and experience to address issues that are facing the village, to conduct research, to make recommendations to the village board. I think that the residents of the village are not as well informed as they could be. I'm thinking of something what seems so simple as a newsletter to the village saying that in this quarter, the village has accomplished the following 3 things. And the village has investigated these 2 topics. Here are the pros, here are the cons, and here's why the village board decided on A versus B. I think communication is essential to the success of any organization, whether it's a village government or a business. I think that the village has the most dedicated employees imaginable. The various, whether it's the police force or the water and sewage treatment people or the office personnel. Those people may be thinking of retiring. They may be thinking of moving on to another job. I think the village should look at succession planning for key positions within the village. So those are some thoughts for how the village board can accomplish more in the coming year. I think the village needs people that they can trust, who have the knowledge and skills to do the job of running the village. I think I'm that person.
Thank you, Fran.
Marie took all my ideas. I believe, as Marie said, that the village should be run like a business, and I believe one of the important things is that the residents of the village and anyone involved with the village needs to be informed, and I think being informed is very important. What I did know from working in the office for about the past year is that a lot does get done in the office. Now granted, we don't, we're all gonna sit here and say, nothing got done, and then, we're gonna do better, and then the next election, somebody's gonna say they did nothing, we're gonna do better, and we've heard this for years and we'll hear it again. Interestingly, a lot does get done in the background, but we don't know about it because we're never told. Now granted, a lot of things should have moved forward, a lot of things should have been completed or at least moved a little bit farther, but we also have to remember, and the new board may be partly the same way, that our village board and a lot of our volunteers on all of the boards are full-time workers with families, and they're volunteering to do what they do. So while we all will sit here and say, yes, we're gonna do better, and we do hope that we do better for you, we need to remember that those who are working full-time and are also on the village board, we owe them a debt of gratitude. And so for a second, I'd like to just deviate and thank Mayor Falone and Stephanie Hawkins and Bruce Campbell, because they have done well for us. They've done it in between working full-time jobs and taking care of their families and so on and so forth. And when I was working full-time, I would never be in this position. I would never be sitting here because there was no time to do it. Having said that, what the village needs is accountability. From your board, you need accountability, and a newsletter or some other way of communicating. And I think one of the most important things that we need right now is figuring out how to communicate with everyone, because that's a difficult thing. Different people get different means of communication. Some of you will read the newspaper, some of you will read a newsletter, some of you want everything online. We're going to have to figure that out, but we will communicate, keep you informed so that you know if we haven't completed a project that at least we've done these 5 steps. We're on target, or we're a month behind target, or whatever it is, but you have the right to know that, and I think that'll do a lot for you.
I'm just going to say that I will work with whatever board is in existence to get things done in our village in a timely manner. There's things that we can fix right away. There's some things that's going to take a little bit of time. But I will work with the board for the people. That's why I'm running. Sometimes you sit around, you're a couch potato, and you watch something on the meetings or something, and you scream and yell and you point fingers and you don't do anything about it. So now it's time to get off the couch and come into the village and be informed. I'd like to see also the community get more involved with the village, and that's a problem. And even as myself, if you don't watch the meetings that are videotaped, you really don't know what's going on. If you're not part of that, or you sit at a meeting I've learned a lot of things in the last 6 months, and going around and talking to people, they had no idea about a lot of the issues that's happening in our village. So I want to bring the people in, because the people are the village, and we have to listen to everyone, and we have to work together, communicate, and have transparency where if a question is asked, we better damn well have the answer. If not, we'll get back to you shortly with an answer. And that's why I'm running for trustee.
Okay, well, thank you very much. The job only pays about $7,000 a year. If you do half of what you're suggesting, you'll get less than the minimum wage on an annual basis. So on behalf of the whole community, I thank you for stepping up and making yourselves available for this public service. Thank you very much. What we'll do is ask the mayoral candidates to introduce themselves to us, make an opening statement, and we'll continue from there. Barney, why don't you go first?
Good evening, and I'd like to add my thanks to everybody who's shown up tonight and participated. And on that note, I'd also like to say I don't even know why we need to run. I say just elect those three. They're a tough act to follow. I will say in terms of background, I'm presently the chairman of the Village Planning Board. My background is one of government, nonprofit, and as well as private sector work over the last 25 years. I've been involved in a number of different grant research projects having to deal with different communities in the Hudson Valley, Peekskill, Hudson, New York, Kingston, Cold Spring, the original LWRP grant, Cortland, Yorktown, Tarrytown. For a number of years I was research director and waterfront director for historic Hudson River towns, where we dealt with specifically economic development issues, waterfront revitalization, Main Street programs, smart growth, things along those lines. I also have a business background in terms of being a pension analyst and financial planner with State Street MetLife Securities for about 20 years prior to being in the nonprofit sector. I presently work for the Westchester County Board of Legislators as a budget analyst, overseeing shared services and municipal grants for intermunicipal agreements having to do with specifically water districts and shared service opportunities among municipalities for planning services, as well as having to do with, in some cases, public safety consolidations. So I've been a resident of Cold Spring for about the past 3 years, although I've been familiar with Cold Spring and been here in one capacity or another as an avid kayaker since the 90s, having to work with Scenic Hudson on River Sweep and a number of projects, including the annual Paddle for the Cure that we do out of Dockside. I reside on Stone Street, and I've served on the village's zoning board. I'm presently on the code update committee with Marie Early, and as you may know, I said earlier, the planning board for the last 2 years, where we have been engaged with the Butterfield redevelopment project, which I'm happy to say seems to be drawing to a conclusion. So if the weather permits, although this looks like the only good night we're going to have this week, we're going to have the public hearing, the first public hearing for the Butterfield project on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. at the firehouse. So if you're not all meetinged out, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
Hello, everyone. Dave Merandy, as you can probably read, and for those that don't know me, thank you guys for having us tonight. I think it's a good time to get a little exposure on what we're really about. For the people that don't know me, I'm 4th generation Cold Spring, or Philipstown, 3rd generation Cold Spring. My parents both grew up on Garden Street, and both were born in Butterfield Hospital, as I was and my siblings and most of my kids. I have 5 children. I attended Loretto School when that was up and running way back, and graduated from there, and then went to Haldane and graduated from Haldane. Soon after that, I started my family. As I said, I have 5 children. We grew up, we moved just slightly out of town to top of Lake Surprise Road, but spent most of our time in Cold Spring since my kids were in the school, and we were very active in the school. So as everyone knows that as children, most of the time you're spending taxing your children back and forth. I have a small construction business. I've worked in just locally for the past over 30 years. I started this up, I guess Mr. Leahy actually started me doing roofs, and then that kind of snowballed into full contracting business, which has been, it's proved very good for me. I've met a lot of people that way, a lot of people in Cold Spring, the village lately also, and around town. So it's an experience that, that I can work off of. I started probably, I think it was in 2001 on the Haldane School Board of Education. I was elected to that. At the time, there were a lot of similarities that were going on then that are going on now. It was an ambitious project, that was, very large. A lot of people weren't very happy with that. I wasn't. My concern was really stems from my mom and, and her staying in the village, because, she raised everyone in her home, lived in the home, her whole life was a part of her. And I thought that this project might, be the tipping point. It might, push her out of there. And I think, that's a concern we all should have in government when we're making decisions. So that's how I actually, started, getting involved in the community. I spent 10 years on the board. 5 of those years, I was the president. There were 2 capital projects that we passed through that the experience from that will definitely be helpful in moving forward with the village. We had over an $11 million annex that sits on the hill now, is completed on time and on budget. This was done through a lot of hard work from the whole board at the time, and a lot of monitoring, and maybe people would say micromanaging, but at the time that's what was needed, and that's what we did. We also had a major capital project replacing the boilers, the roofs, coping on this building. It was for facilities that had been neglected, much like some of the stuff in the village that's been neglected, and it's hard to come up with money for this. We passed these, we brought both of these to the public. I believe the last capital project we didn't really have to have a referendum on, but everyone felt that we really should, because we want the people to have input on that and be part of that project. And going forward with anything in the village, I would also recommend that to my board, and that would be my stance, that everything would go to the people for their support. At the time, I said there were similarities. I think one of the biggest similarities was the lack of trust in maybe the administration and what was going on. There were a lot of disgruntled teachers at the time. It was, in a way, a mess that it took a little bit to change that. It took the right people on the board to change that, people working together. I was lucky to have a very diverse board, but people whose object was to do the best for the school with the taxpayers in mind. So I have people like Mike Gingulis and Joe Curto on there. Mike Gingulis probably is on the other spectrum of my political beliefs on a lot of things, but Mike and I are good friends, and we work together on that. Mike Bowman actually helped run one of my campaigns, or worked with me on that with his mom, and got me elected initially. So what we need, and what I see that we need, is to have people come together, and there's a lot of lip service paid to that. But I actually have done it. I've actually worked with other people. I can actually work with everybody that's on the board, and we can move things forward. Also, I am currently on the town board, Philipstown Town Board. This is my last year, so I will, if elected, lose 5 or 6 months, I guess. But it's also another experience of working with more people, more ideas, seeing how budgets are run, working on negotiations. I've negotiated, we recently negotiated the CSEA contract for the town with the highway workers. When I was involved at Haldane, I was involved in several negotiations with the teachers union, a very tough organization to deal with, if anyone's ever had the pleasure. But things worked out well, and I believe the end result benefited everyone. So I think my experience working on these boards and at Haldane, my experience is more local. I haven't been all over. It's been this community. I care for this community. I've stayed in this community. I will be in this community probably till the day I die. And so I have a vested interest here. I know a lot of people. I know people that want to stay in their homes that are aging. I know people that have just moved here that aren't incredibly wealthy, but they're here for the same reason we all are, and that is because it's a great community. And I want to represent all those people. So that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Well, thank you both very much. In case you were wondering if this particular segment would just be a replay of the last segment, we'll disabuse you of that a little bit with some different questions, at least at the outset, although we do want to cover some of the issues raised earlier. Michael?
Okay, please, both of you discuss how you view the role of the mayor as distinct from the trustees. You're not just another trustee, and how would you intend to conduct the office of mayor if you're elected? I think we'll start with Barney.
Well, I think there's quite a distinction between them. It's recognized in New York state law, village law as well, and I think it was touched on by a couple of the trustee candidates. The mayor in a village setting is the chief administrative officer, the chief executive officer of the village. You know, we heard a lot about the village needs to be run like a business. From a corporate perspective, it is in fact a business, right? The mayor is responsible for personnel, administration, human resources, as well as delegating and working with the Board of Trustees. The distinction is the trustees are the legislative body of the village. They set policy, they determine the budgets, they oversee the execution. The day-to-day responsibility for administering the village and running the village rests with the mayor. You heard earlier that the mayor is the police commissioner. Under the law, the mayor is responsible. The mayor is accountable. That is the distinction, that is the difference. I think given my experience, my corporate background, my ability working with senior nonprofit positions as well as management positions, I've had to hire and fire people. I've had to run budgets. I've had to run major projects, capital, day-to-day operations, as well as long-term planning over 3, 5, and even 10-year periods of time. I think that's what probably has not been emphasized as far as the village is concerned. I mean, we've seen that as an issue on the planning board as far as the Butterfield review in terms of trying to get some of the information, trying to ascertain where the village is, what the records are, who's accountable, who's responsible for the execution, and more often than not, we kind of have to, you know, do a little digging. It's not apparent, it's not readily available, and quite frankly, a lot of the employees and some of the administrative positions here aren't as comfortable or as familiar with making those decisions or knowing what those responsibilities are. And I think, you know, that's what I bring to the table, is that depth of management experience over various capacities in different organizations over the last 25 years. And I think you see that in the Butterfield project. You know, despite however you may feel about the Butterfield project, I mean, in the last 18 months, we have done a tremendous amount of work on that project.
Thank you, Dave.
I think I'll give a less technical answer to that. I believe that the mayor is one of 5, but he is the person that has to set the stage. He is the person that has to have the agenda, and he has to have control of the board. He has to work with the board. He has to, you know, he has to have their respect, and also he has to be able, you know, he has to build a trust within the board. I believe that the mayor, you know, if I'm elected mayor, I would set the agendas. I would make specific agendas. I'd have people report, you know, on a monthly basis. And I believe that's what's kind of lacking now. I don't believe the existing mayor gets involved as much as he really should. He should be the one that's guiding the board. Everyone should be, you know, part of where we're going. I would have a sit down with all of the trustees, and I would say, ask them for their top 3 or 4 projects that they would see as the most important, and then we would work on those. I would delegate, you know, delegate projects and have them as point people for those projects and report back. There has to be accountability, and I think, as they say, the buck stops here, and I think that's true with the mayor. The mayor has to be the one that sets the agenda, that has to set, how things are gonna be worked, and has to control meetings, and has to control the, what is going to happen and how it's going to happen during the year.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to follow up
Sure.
with one item that relates. In my perception of the current board, having attended a lot of, if not all of the village board meetings, my perception is that there is not a lot of communication among the trustees between meetings. There are questions and comments made at meetings that make it sound like there's been no communication. And I'm wondering, for both of you as mayor, how would you manage communications among the board members themselves when you cannot meet as a board, if there's a quorum because of the open meetings law? But how can you affect good communications amongst trustees with the mayor and with the administration?
Well, I think the key to that is, what I said initially, when we have a sit down, or when the new board is in place, that we have to have a talk. If people are really serious about getting along, having a kumbaya moment, I think, and if you're really serious about doing that, then we have to understand and we have to discuss that, on a one-on-one, initially, that there are things that, if there's questions to be asked from another board member, that there's ways to do that. You don't bring it up at the board meeting. You don't try to have a gotcha moment with each board member. If we're working together, then it has to be understood from all of the trustees that are we working together or aren't we? And if everyone's saying we are, which they will be, then you don't try to get gotcha moments. You don't try to, upstage someone. If there's an issue that you don't understand, that you don't have information on, that one of your fellow trustees is working on, then you should call them. You should try to get the information before the meeting even starts. And I think that's essential to making the board look better, to making people's perception of the board as a working body that's really working for the village.
Well, finish to answer that by talking about my experience with the planning board, and just so in terms of full disclosure, 3 other members of the planning board are here, but it's not a planning board meeting, so there's no quorum. But
It will be if they speak.
it will be if they speak, but they're not going to. But my question, to answer that question, is I don't think communication is a problem if you have systems in place, if you have a process in place. As I mentioned earlier, we communicate amongst ourselves on the planning board on a very regular basis, I would say weekly. I mean, there's a lot of email, there's a lot of conversation going back. In order for us to keep the agendas moving, we processed a tremendous amount of paper over the last 18 months, vis-a-vis Butterfield, updating our application process, joint meetings with the Zoning Board of Appeals and the HDRB on issues that we need to collaborate with across different boards. We've met twice with the village board itself. So in order for us to realize that workload and meet those objectives, you have to develop a very collegial atmosphere, and you have to have systems and resources in place that allow you to collaborate and allow you to communicate. And I think the productivity of the Village of Cold Spring Planning Board speaks to that. We've done a tremendous amount of work over a very compressed period of time, and we disagree, sometimes violently, and you'll probably hear some of that on Wednesday night as well too. But the fact of the matter is, everybody's aware of what the goals are, everybody's aware of what the objectives are, everybody's aware of what their responsibilities are, and everybody acts reasonably to achieve those. And that fosters communication, that fosters collaboration, and that fosters trust. And that's what we need to emulate on our village board.
Okay, thanks. There's been a lot of discussion this evening, and you've touched on it already, about the need to hold down property taxes, particularly to people be able to maintain their residences. Governor Cuomo and the legislature have been sending a very strong message the last couple of years about property taxes, tax cap, and also the idea of the consolidation of local government services. So what I'm asking you is to talk a little bit about the idea of consolidating services. We live in a town of 10,000 people, and we have a number of repetitive services. So we have 3 courts, a couple of highway departments, and buildings departments, etc. So I'm wondering, are there any services currently maintained by the village that you might entertain the idea of combining them with either town or county services? Barney?
Well, first, in order to, that point is, when you talk about consolidation of services, it's kind of a misnomer because it's really not about a consolidation of services. When you mention the governor and whatever is happening, there's a trend in New York State. They're pushing down costs, they're pushing down mandates to a local level, right? You see what's happened with the tax cap, right? Now we're entering a new phase, which is coming up this year, the tax freeze, right? Which we're starting to feel the effects in local school systems now. But what is going to happen is it's going to start to hit the municipalities. And specifically what that means to you as taxpayers is everybody's gotten their STAR tax credit, and now you might have gotten last October or November, the election had nothing to do with it, I'm sure, a tax rebate check, because if your local municipality stayed under the 2% tax cap, which is really not a 2% tax cap, it has to do with whatever the rate of inflation was. So for the village of Cold Spring, I think it was 1.54%. So if the village of Cold Spring raised taxes less than 1.54%, which it did, you got a tax rebate check, all right, which might have been anywhere in the order of $18 to $130, all right? But what is changing going forward now, because the governor continues to push costs down on a local level without mandate relief, what we're going to see now, starting with this fiscal year, the 2015-16 fiscal year, is not only will you not get your tax cap check, all right, with the tax freeze that's in place now, all local governments, statewide, village, county, whatever it is, whatever local government is, you are now required to file by the beginning of June, the third week of June, a government efficiency plan. You must tell the state controller's office and the state director of budget how your municipality is going to reduce its tax levy by 1% a year for the next 3 years. And if you do not meet that, right, no tax freeze, no rebate check, right? So you can see the noose tightening, right? We need to consolidate. The governor is telling you, state government is telling you, you need to consolidate services. You need to share costs, right? You're not going to get revenue from the state. Like we heard earlier today, this evening, we have to pursue grants. Well, that's great that we have to pursue grants, but guess what? Grants are becoming more competitive. They're harder to get. It's not a reliable funding stream. It tends to be one-shots. You can't use them for operating costs. And usually they come with strings attached, and there are co-payments involved. So this is a very complicated process, and we're starting to move in that direction. We can have volunteer grant committees and whatever, but we need to start to look at consolidation of services, whether it's courts, whether it's police, whether it's fire districts. I mean, it's something that we are going to have to address in the next year or two, regardless of what we feel about it philosophically.
Is there any one department that you would be willing in that report that you'll have to file in June that you mentioned? Because you'll be in office starting in April. Is there any one department that you would include in that report?
The one department that I would include in that report, as you heard it mentioned earlier, is we're going to have to look at what police services cost. Because what ends up happening, the village has a budget of $3.8 million, of which 1.5 million is tax levy. Right? There was I forgot who said it, but the budget is 3.8, not 1.5. Of that 1.5, almost $500,000 is dedicated to police services. So that right there is the first place that we could look to look for some type of consolidation, some type of sharing of services more efficiently, because those organizations are already in place. We have the sheriff's department, we have the state police. So if we need to get something, as you mentioned, if we have to have something ready to go in June, that's the low-hanging fruit. As difficult as it may be, that's the first piece of the puzzle.
Dave?
Yeah, as far as first of all, on the tax cap, on all my years on the school board, we kept the taxes under the 2% cap, and this was before they instituted it. It was because that's, I think there's a cap, or there was kind of a cap that we set ourselves. Knowing the town and knowing what people could afford, we set a cap ourselves. So, moving forward, when they started the cap, it was an easy thing to do. On the town board, we've done the same thing because it's mandated, but we've kept it down as low as we can. Not basically just because of the cap, but really what people can afford. You know, it's not like we had to be told, you know, this is the number or this is the percentage. You know, we really have done our best to keep taxes at the lowest level they are. As far as consolidation goes, you know, I think everything should be looked at. I'm willing to look at every department there is to see whether or not it's feasible to do it, or whether or not it's financially makes sense to do it. You know, one area is the building inspector. We were, on the town board, you know, that was offered to the village, that it would have given service for the whole week, you know, instead of part-time service. It would have given 2 inspectors, it would have given a secretary. If you called, you would have gotten an answer. So, you know, consolidation for me, in one area we could look at, you know, right off the bat would be the building inspector. As far as the police force goes, I think, as I said, we should look into it. But right now we're working with part-time police, and I think we have 16 or so. I'm not sure how many are on the total shift. But they're part-time because we don't have to pay benefits. And if we have to hire full-time sheriffs, you need, like, say 4 of them, 8 of them. I don't know what the number would be, you know, to run a 24-hour shift. But that's going to run into a lot of money. So, you know, just thinking about it, you know, quickly, the amount of money, you know, that the sheriffs with their, you know, each individual sheriff's deputy, you know, the cars that would be involved, and with benefits, I think that cost would shoot us over $400,000 in seconds. So I'm for consolidation. I think the building inspector is one place we should definitely look at. The court systems we should definitely look at, but I'm not sure exactly how that would work. I would definitely need a lot more information on that, as I would, you know, for everything here. And I think that the board, you know, would be interested as a whole to have all the information before we, you know, move ahead with anything. So yes, consolidation is the buzzword, and it's going to be mandated. So we have to start looking, but we have to do our homework.
Okay, thanks.
Just a point of clarification, there's 14 part-time police officers, 1 per shift. And I really wouldn't look at the building inspector as the first stop, because that's revenue positive to the village at this point in time. He's bringing in more money than he's costing us.
Well, if I can counter with that, I just think that the building inspector, it wouldn't necessarily be, depending on the arrangement we made with the town, we wouldn't necessarily lose revenue. If we work out a deal on larger projects or I'm not sure how it would work out, and that's one of the areas we'd have to explore. We wouldn't want to lose the tax revenue, but I mean the revenue that's generated from the building department. So I think, you know, if there was an agreement made between the town and the village, that's one of the areas we'd have to clear up. You know, we would like
I
the
agree, but
skills.
that wouldn't be the starting point, because right now it's making us money. We're looking for a place
Exactly,
where we can save money.
it's making us, yeah, well, it could save us money also, and it will also generate better services.
Okay. Mike?
We will repeat one question that we asked the trustees. If you could both pick out a top priority issue or project that you know is a priority for the village, but something you're keenly interested in moving forward if you're elected. Tell us about something at the very top of your list that goes beyond process and communications, but meat and potatoes.
Well, you took away my answer, because it's kind of process that I really rate as the #1, you know, issue in the town or in the village. I really see that. If you don't, it's the foundation of everything going forward. If you don't have a board in place, a working board that's working with the other departments and communicating well, then all of the projects that you want to move forward aren't going to move forward, you know, in a positive way. So, you know, for me, the top priority of coming into office really is process. It is really getting the board to work so people trust us and so we can move forward with projects.
So I'll push you a bit on that, Dave.
Okay.
If you're successful in that, then what is the #2 thing on your list?
The #2, well, we all know that, I mean, I would say the number one priority would be definitely the sewers and the waters. The projects that we have going now, their quality of life, they're essential to us, so we have to see those move forward. I think working with Greg and, you know, being in close communications with him, having him give us updates monthly on where we are with that, you know, and discussing the funding and how that's all working will be definitely important. I believe the sidewalk grant, it's important to keep that moving ahead. We need a point person, you know, that would, you know, come at a monthly meeting and say where that's going. If nothing's going on, then they should basically say, well, there has been no progress. I think one thing, you know, when we talk about working with DOT or DEC, you have to realize these entities are, you know, are powerful in themselves, and you can't really push them forward in the way that you would like to. You can't say this is going on too long or this is dragging out too long. You can have someone that's in contact with them and working with them, but, you know, like, you know, people are saying that the sidewalk thing, it has gone on for a long time, but as anyone knows that's been working, you know, in government, things don't get done as quickly as you'd like, that's for sure.
I think, could you repeat the question just so I...
Well, as we ask the trustees, just tell us what's at the top of your priority list beyond process, or begin.
Well, beyond process, because I'm all about process, so we want to spend time on process. But the one thing I would say, and you heard it mentioned by the trustee candidates in different permutations and whatever, but what we're talking about is asset management. Right now, we need to have a snapshot of where the village stands, what our physical plant is. I mean, you heard at last week's village board meeting, they had to pass an emergency bond for $300,000 because we've had sewer pipes disintegrate in the lower village on Fish Street. And that's going to be recurring with more frequency, you know, on a more regular basis. So when I talk about asset management, we need to come in and we need to look at our physical plant, what we own, what property we have, tools, vehicles, equipment, what the shelf life is, what the aging is, what do we own? Because right now it's all word of mouth. You heard about some village employees maybe looking to retire and move on. We need to have what's called a knowledge transfer. We need to know how you do that. Why do you do it that way? All right? Where is that equipment located? You know, is there a better way to use that equipment? Like right now, we just spent $43,000 for a Bobcat front loader. That saves several dozen man-hours per week because it can be used in a lot of different applications. Quite honestly, we've seen the effect in the last couple of snowstorms. Having Ed Trimble and the crew have access to that Bobcat to clear some of the side streets and whatever, it has cut the workload and the time by about a third. So those types of smart investments, we need to take a look at what we own, what condition it's in, what it's used for, what's its replacement value, whether it's a water treatment plant, whether it's a dump truck, whether it's a knowledge process that some of our workers have. We need to be able to then go in and figure out, okay, this is what we need to fund, this is when we need to fund it, and then we need to identify revenue streams. Whether it's a grant, whether it's low interest loans from the Environmental Facilities Corp, or the Dormitory Authority, or working with our state senators, or our federal representatives. You know, grants are great, but grants you can't count on. And for a municipality of any type, there are only three ways you can generate money: taxes, revenue, or borrowing. All right? And every government on this planet has some mix of those three. But until we have a snapshot, until we know where we are and what we need, right, we're not going to be able to come up with that mix, and we're not going to be able to monitor how we spend that money and where we need to invest our assets.
Okay, thanks. I've always wanted to say the words, I cover the waterfront. So, having said that, the village waterfront, as was discussed earlier, is a relatively narrow area, but it does present opportunities, potential opportunities, for increases in tourism or increases in revenue. So I was wondering if you would each briefly speak about the boat club, about the dockside property, and also the village garage property, which in the comprehensive plan is discussed as another site for potential building of new ventures. So please just let us know about your waterfront strategy. Barney, why don't you start off this time?
Okay. When you talk about our waterfront strategy, I think as Marie and some of the trustee candidates went through, we invested a lot of time and energy over the last 8 to 10 years with volunteer efforts to identify what some of the opportunities and what some of the problems are. And I think one of the things that we need to discuss or think about is look at the waterfront in a holistic fashion, all right? We have different components. If you go north to south, we have the village property with the garage, then followed with dockside, then we have, as you come in, you've got the dock, the boat club, and so forth. Plus, we have a residential component down there, right? Which makes it a little bit unique. It's been identified in the comprehensive plan. It really is a mixed-use area in terms of waterfront access. So it has opportunities for recreation, opportunities for revenue, right? It has a massive infrastructure need. We have storm surge that we have to look at. We have a sustainable shorelines project that's being evaluated as a pilot program for dockside. So there's a lot going on there, all right? We have the issue with the boat club. I would say how we need to address it is, first I'll start north to south again. If we look at the town garage, where that really is an underutilized piece of property. I mean, and historically that's how it's been in most waterfront communities in the Hudson Valley, is the waterfront was the least desirable post-industrial area, so that's where you put your water treatment plants, your oil storage tanks, you warehouse your equipment, in some cases your dumps. We're right kind of beautiful view of the riverfront. But that is an opportunity, and when we look at consolidation of services, when we look at sharing services with neighboring municipalities, that is something that we should consider. That is a valuable piece of real estate that could be generating income and revenue for the community, as well as providing amenities, whether it's a hotel complex, whether it's some kind of retail complex, or some kind of combination of the both, all right? The uses for the municipality there should be moved off that site. Now, whether we partner with Philipstown, we partner with Nelsonville, it's in some capacity we partner with a municipal complex that might eventually include a fire station or some other municipal offices, it's something that we have to start to look at, it's something we have to consider, right? Moving further down, the dockside property was discussed earlier. And that really, unfortunately, that's a misnomer, is because the village presently has, I think, the second or third iteration of the dockside lease from the Office of Parks before it now. It really hasn't been discussed because there's really not a lot of we can do with that property. I mean, it is dedicated parkland now. It's the Office of Parks Administration. It's really passive use recreation. So we can show movies at it, we can watch the sunset, we can walk our dogs, but we're not going to be in a position to put any permanent structures there that generate revenue. The parks lease does not allow that. You can do things on a temporary basis, but guess what? The Parks Department in New York State are your partners. They get a cut of the action, right? So I've seen these agreements in other communities where it takes years to negotiate them, and quite frankly, you know, all you're looking to do is buy the maintenance and buy the liability. I don't think we could generate enough revenue there to cover our cost of operation, and quite frankly, we have unrestricted access to the site now, and it's on the Parks Department's dime. So I would be very cautious about trying to take over that site, particularly with the development restrictions that attach to that type of a lease. Going over to the dock area, it was mentioned about generating additional revenue from tour boats and whatever. That's terrific. And one of the opportunities to do something like that, and it's done in other municipalities in other states, is a per head charge. All right, we have the C Street coming in, and it looks like the Normandy invasion on weekends. All right, so we should do it, by all means, we should get a per foot charge, but we should get a per head charge. Because those people are coming in, they're impacting our infrastructure. Think of it as a user fee. They're using our bathrooms, they're using our facilities, there's wear and tear on, you know, they're in terrible shape, but there's still wear and tear on our sidewalks, right? So somebody's got to pay for something, so we might as well let the visitors who are enjoying it contribute to the cost of maintaining the atmosphere for them. As far as the boat club is concerned, you know, the boat club has been an integral part of this community for 60 years, right? The DEC, but that being said, the DEC has to do the cleanup. Because the priority at this point in time is the village cannot be in a position to assume any residual liability for that cleanup. So the DEC has to go in there, whatever their schedule is, and they're saying it's 12 to 15 months at the outside. They need to be able to have access, do what they need to do, and give us a clean bill of health going forward so we don't have any liability. That being said, I think the village has dropped the ball about being more proactive in supporting the boat club and finding a way to allow them to continue their operations, not unimpeded, because that's not realistic, but with a minimum amount of disruption. Like the one thing that I've always asked is if Parks was so anxious for us to take over the dockside site, why didn't we have the Parks Department talking to the DEC and allow the boat club to store their equipment and their boats there off-season on dockside? No impact to anybody, a win-win. It would have given the DEC access, maybe speeded up the cleanup, and given us an opportunity to return the boat club and some type of partnership for the larger public a lot sooner. We have problems with the bulkhead at the boat club, right? We have to recognize the fact that the village does not have the resources or the manpower to maintain that site exclusively. We need partnerships with the boat club. We have an opportunity to put floats, to put out moorings, to generate revenue, right? That would help the boat club, that would help the village. So we have to find ways to help the boat club to help us to succeed, but at the same time, allow all our residents and our taxpayers to access and enjoyment of our waterfront. Too long.
Okay, no, it's okay. Dave, go ahead.
I have to ask the question again. No, I guess I'll go from south to north.
Thank you.
I'll start with the boat club. I know a lot of people who were in the boat club. I had family that was in the boat club. Some of the best characters in Cold Spring came from the boat club that I remember. Tina's husband, Hawkeye, and Michael Snitchy, and Slimmer. These are just some of the characters are there, and I know the effort and time that they put into the boat club. So it is kind of it's a piece of history for me. It's something that I don't want to go away. I want to see it stay there. That said, I also think I believe negotiations are going on right now between the boat club and the village, and I'm not privy to that, so I'm not sure what's being discussed. I would hope out of that, that the boat club will open up a little more of it. Land use. Maybe there's a place to store kayaks or whatever, because the demographics of Cold Spring have changed. There are more people who use smaller boats, or there are a number of people who use smaller boats, and they also need a place to store stuff. It's village property. I think I would hope something could be worked out with the boat club there. I don't know their feelings on that. I also think, taking a look at the membership, I'm not sure, how many are village residents. It's something I would like to know. If it's, I think that there should be some type of a fee, generated, nothing exorbitant to out-of-towners, that are either in Philipstown, or if they're, from out of state or wherever they are from. I believe that money should go, somehow a small fee to the village. Dockside, I think that this is one of the most incredible views. I think Bob Ferris said, driving, around the whole country, and you come back and you're wondering why you ever left. Well, if you go down there at sunset and it's just these open fields and you're looking down up the Hudson, it's incredible, and it's something that I would like to preserve. I think that there should be talk with the state, and I believe there might even be ongoing talks of maybe even them giving us that property outright. If we have to work with the state, as Barney said, we are restricted in many ways, but if we could actually own that property, I believe we could generate money from it by putting booths or whatever along the perimeters of the woods perimeter on the property, so it doesn't obstruct views, so that the open space is saved, and that could also generate money from vendors, renting those properties. The highway garage, unfortunately, is on one of the most beautiful pieces of property also, and much could be done with that property. think looking into that, the first question would be, where are we going to be able to put the highway department? And where are we going to put the salt sheds? And where are we going to put the maintenance, buildings? So when looking at the highway department, I would definitely be open to moving that and to leasing that land, or to talking to someone that's more hip on on what can be there and generate more money. And I think that's where it comes into really getting feedback from the community and people that actually work with that. I think the first thing that we have to do with the highway department, though, if we did decide that we wanted to use that land, is where actually are we going to move it, and who does want to partner with us. So it's easy to say we'd like to, take over that property and move them somewhere, but we have limited space in the village, as you all know, so I'm not sure where that would go.
Thanks.
Okay, Mike.
It's really, I guess, an extension of the discussion of the waterfront, but do you think that the village government has a role in promoting economic development within the village? Is there anything the village should be doing that it's not doing now to improve the business climate for existing enterprises or to attract new businesses? What can village government do to help business in Cold Spring?
Well, I think one thing that can be done is we have to have a stronger connection with the Chamber of Commerce. I think that Main Street, if we're talking about small businesses, that is Main Street basically. I think that, I think it's, the Chamber really has to take a stronger role in actually, developing plans and actually selling themselves to people that, could possibly come in here with different stores. I don't believe the Chamber, I don't know what the Chamber actually does now, or how they're involved with the village, but I think developing Main Street, I think it should be something that the Chamber should be involved in along with the village. It's very hard to generate money. When we talk about generating the money, it would basically be from sales tax, which we don't share, which is really the problem. If we want more and more tourists to come in here, to come to our stores, then there has to be a benefit to the community. If we have C Street parking there and huge amount of people are unloaded onto the docks, as Barney said, to what benefit is this, to the village? And even if it's a small amount of money, again, we are, it's a quality of life, or the town is flooded with people, and, there's people that are here because they like a quiet village and like, the pace of life here. So if we are going to do something, whatever we're moving ahead with that's going to generate money, we have to see what the impact of that is on the residents of the village, and that's what I'm most interested in. I think, if we can somehow work with Putnam County, it doesn't seem like they will ever, share revenue with us on the sales tax, any percentage of that. If they did, then we could promote businesses, and it would actually make more sense because we would be getting something out of it.
Okay, when you talk about economic development and the role of the Chamber of Commerce or whatever, that really is to a large degree, it's an untapped resource. And by way of background, as disclosure, I'm a Chamber of Commerce member here in Cold Spring, but for 10 years I was president and CEO of the Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, which we grew to 400 members. So in order for any community to remain economically vital, you're either growing or you're falling back, right? And Cold Spring is a tourist destination, right? But that being said, there's a lot of focus on retail. And to Allison Anthoine's credit, she's the president of the Chamber of Commerce. In the last 8 or 9 months, she's tried to shift the focus of the Chamber more toward economic development. We've had guest speakers come in and talk about the opportunities for branding, marketing. One of the big possibilities that's on the horizon here, and Richard Shea is a huge proponent in moving this project forward, is the Hudson Fjord Trail. Now that brings a whole host of economic development opportunities to Cold Spring, which is the southern nexus of that trail. But that being said, it also brings a lot of problems that we're going to need to address, or that are going to be exacerbated by existing conditions in Cold Spring. So the opportunity to develop tourism-related industries, i.e. service businesses, marketing, things along those lines, I think we have to maybe focus on growing retail to a degree, but we also have to look at the companion businesses, the spin-off businesses. because we have a lot of talented, it's been mentioned, we have a lot of talented newcomers here. We have a lot of technology-oriented people here. So there are a lot of home-based businesses, a lot of startup and entrepreneurial energy and capital in this community, and that's one of the things that we're struggling with on the Code Update Committee. We have to change our zoning code to energize that type of activity, home office occupancy, small business occupancy, in a way that protects and preserves the history of our community, doesn't negatively impact the residents who are already here, but we have to think about where we want to be in 10 or 15 years. Where are we going to establish those nodes that are going to allow us to grow those businesses that are going to generate that revenue and provide those jobs? Now, along those lines, Butterfield, the complex in Butterfield, presents a great opportunity in that regard, in terms of co-shared workspace. I have a friend who's set up 2 of these, one in Tarrytown and one in Yonkers, and she's talking about coming up to Cold Spring. So we put her in touch with Paul Galero about coming up with co-shared workspace, someplace that is wired, that has the capacity for high-speed communication, for video conferencing, networking, that can be designed in a way that facilitates that kind of collaboration. Because it's very hard to find that space in Cold Spring, because it's small historic buildings that are underserved in terms of wiring and infrastructure. But to start with a clean piece of paper, maybe Butterfield is one of those locations in the retail buildings or in the office space. Perhaps when Marathon comes online, we can talk proactively with that developer and maybe do some overlay zoning, which the Code Update Committee will address, in terms of maybe coming up with some live workspace, whether it's for the arts, so we can activate what we're doing with DIA and within Peekskill, we're on the train line, or maybe some kind of companion small businesses, whether it's graphics, whether it's marketing or whatever. We have the opportunity, we have the resources here, we just have to be smart in how we plan that.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to bring up one particular project that will need capital funding, and that would be addressing the Cold Spring Fire Company's understandable request for an upgrade of their facility, which is a village-owned facility. So I was wondering if you could both address that briefly, only because we're coming around the far turn here in terms of time, but give us a sense of, since you both like process a little bit, how should we proceed to arrive at a conclusion about that project? Barney, why don't you start?
I think, whether we want to address it or not, the issue with the firehouse presents a failure of village government. I mean, I've been to a half dozen meetings on this subject, and I've talked to Ralph Falloon, who's a prior fire captain, a company captain, and he usually starts a conversation out with, well, we've been discussing this for 12 years. All right? That's not exactly how I would lead into a conversation about addressing a problem or a solution. All right? I think in talking to Steve Smith, is the Cold Spring Fire Company, the volunteer company, they've gone as far as they can go in terms of they've been drafting plans, they've got a lot of pro bono work done, a tremendous amount of work if you've been to some of their presentations. In fact, I can't believe they've gotten $50,000 or $60,000 worth of drawings pro bono out of an architect. And I'm sure he expects a quid pro quo, or he's hoping that he'll get the job going forward. But has been widely reported in the press, developing a firehouse on that site on Main Street hosts a unique set of problems. It's infill development in an existing downtown. So the cost associated with redeveloping that site is realistically, it's going to end up anywhere from 30 to 50% more than developing it on a fresh site someplace else. And the other thing that hasn't even been addressed, because it came up at the meeting and I asked the question, is the present firehouse is on the site of an old garage, right? So what do you think is going to happen if they knock that building down? The DEC is going to swoop in here and kick us to death, because you're going to find, God knows what you're going to find percolating under the surface of that building. So whatever aggressive construction schedule they envision, we're going to be looking at orange fencing around it for at least half that time. All right? So that being said, how we would need to address this, quite honestly, we're talking about a project that's going to be anywhere from $4 to $6 million by the time the dust settles, right? In terms of soft costs, how it's approached, and whatever. So to spread that among less than 900 tax parcels in this village, that's a heavy lift, right? And it doesn't allow for any expansion. It doesn't allow for addressing any future needs or future growth in the village. So I almost think we have to look at an alternative site. Now, whether we can locate a site in the village, which I think is problematic, because we're talking about moving those uses out of the village, so we can generate revenue and have more successful development, perhaps we're going to end up ultimately looking at a fire district in some capacity. We mentioned earlier, and we've heard all night, how the state is pushing us to consolidate, pushing us to share services. What do you think our chances of funding are for getting a grant to build a $6 million firehouse to service a community of 2,000 people when we have a community of 500 people next door that adjoins another community that we provide fire services for, and we have 2 fire districts as it is? So I think the answer lies outside the village. Whether people are willing or able to address it at this point in time, that's another matter. But it's going to take a collaborative effort. It's going to have to take a frank conversation, and we're going to have to look at all the numbers, and we're going to have to make a determination, and then we're going to have to find where can we get the money. And that might dictate where we build and what we build and who we partner with.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's needless to say, the fire company, provides a vital service to the community, and it's at a very low cost. I think they're, from being on the town board and looking at all, the budgets for the other fire companies and districts, whatever, that, you look at Cold Spring and they really are a company that's really conscious of cost and really, runs a tight ship. If you're if you're a contractor, or I don't even think you have to be, and you walk into the place or look at the sides of the building, you can see that, there is a need for a new building. I think one way to start on that is we really have to come up with a number that, people are going to be, once again, comfortable with in spending, And I also think how you present a project like that is really important. When you start a project out and say it's going to be $8 or $9 million and you show a colossal building, everyone just freaks. It's like, it's the end of the world and this isn't going to happen. And then everyone's, saying, nasty things about the fire company and Taj Mahals, and everything goes on from there. So the presentation is key. I went to both presentations, and I would have done that in a totally different way. I really think, you have to have the information. You have to know exactly why you need the fire company. You have to, or a new building. You have to explain better the deteriorating and bulging walls, and have a cost for that, so people can understand why you have, why you want to move. You also, its location and how easy it is to actually respond to fires is also an issue there. I think that you have to come up with a number to start with that you think people, unfortunately this is, it's been put off, as many people have said, but it's coming up now at a time when we have two other capital projects going, and so you layer those together, and there's no way that, a village is going to say, give an okay, for a project of that size. So I'm not sure what can be done for what amount, but I think you really have to break it down into, say the village can absorb or is willing to spend $3 to $4 million or 2 to 3. I don't know where the number is. I just think we should, work with that number and see if there's a possibility of upgrading that, tearing that down, or doing a one-story. I don't know what can be done there, but I think we don't have enough information. And when you don't have enough information, you start throwing numbers around and saying something's 30% more, or 40 or 50, or I went to Maypac and that was $325 a square foot, and this is or 325, and this is 200. It doesn't bode well for passing a project like that. You don't really have to get the numbers together. You don't want people just throwing numbers out there and then coming in with a project later on that's way higher than that. When I was at the presentations, a lot of stuff wasn't included, so it was really hard to figure out, what the total was going to really be, and I don't think anyone really knew. So I think there's more work that has to be done. I think the village has to partner with them. I think there has to be a committee of some sort. It didn't seem like the fire company was willing to work with village or other community members when someone asked that question. I believe that they have to be involved. I think there has to be a piece of this that works for the village also, meeting space or whatever, that makes it more palatable to the village as a whole. If we get something out of it, something we can use along with you getting a new fire company. A lot of things weren't mentioned, or were mentioned vaguely. If we are building a house for a ladder truck, then let's include the $1 million for the ladder truck. There are things that were mentioned kind of vaguely, and it was hard to really add all these numbers up. And I do applaud them for getting as far as they did. I've been involved in the projects like with the school where you never get that detail of drawings. I don't know what kind of deal's been made, hopefully none with the architect on that, but I do applaud him for getting that far. As far as moving the firehouse, as I said before, I'm willing to look at like any possibility on that and what the impact would be on the residents of the village. Unfortunately, places like Marathon you can't use because there's no way to get in and out of there easily on Kendall Avenue or going through private, through restrictions on the Forge Gate Apartments. It is possible to build, from my limited research, to build a firehouse, and it could be the Cold Spring Fire Company in a different village. We could use the Allen property, from what I understand. I don't think that is restricted. I think that's be something that should be looked into. I think if the access and the impact on the local residents, having it there, I just think it would be a great place for it. It would be easy access for everyone, easy parking. Parking's another issue that's always come up, with the fire company, is like you're responding to a call and you can't find a place to park anywhere. Well, that's going to delay your response time. So, another piece of property that I would definitely be interested in looking at, and I don't know, there's costs obviously with it and a lot more that would go into it, but I would look at the Allen Coles property.
All right, well, thank you both very much. We've covered a great deal of ground, and I would ask you both to give us a summation of your thoughts and why you should be elected.
You're not going to roll a question into that?
No, I have an obligation to get people out of here, so I'd just like you to sum up, please. Dave, you can go, yeah.
Okay. I guess, and I'll try to make this really brief, and when trying to actually get my thoughts together and why I am running, when people ask you you're running and everyone says you're crazy, and if you ask someone else to run, they say you're crazy. The reason why I really want to run and the reason why I want to work as the mayor in your village is because of my deep roots here, but also because of all the people that I've met here. I've met a lot of people that I really respect, and it just expands your knowledge of the whole world, and that's nice. And I appreciate all the people that have been here and the people that have worked hard to make this village what it is. The people that are here, that have been here for ages, that wanted to stay the same as it is, it's the same reason why the people have moved here. They moved here because it's a great place to live. It's the pace of life. It's something that we want to protect. I would like to be, the mayor so that I can work to assure that the village will remain the way it is, or if it's working towards the future, things definitely will change, that it doesn't change in a drastic manner in which the village is not the village anymore.
I would say, in terms of, if you listen to what you've heard here tonight, both between Dave and myself, as well as the trustee candidates earlier on, in this forum, in the forum next week, any conversations you have, any questions you have, or an event you go to, think of an election as a job interview, all right? We're here interviewing for this job, all right? And quite frankly, what you need to look at least I do when I do hiring, is you need to look at skills, you need to look at temperament, you need to look at experience, you need to look at what the position needs. What are you looking to fill, right? Because the job changes over time, and the job you hire and the person you hire change with it, right? We have had, quite frankly, a skills deficit on our village board for the last several years in one capacity or another. We started to turn things around. You heard from some excellent candidates tonight that have backgrounds in finance, in business, in public safety, and I think any combination of them, will be an asset to the village. I think going forward, what we need to look at, though, is quite honestly, where do we want the village to be in 5, 10, or 15 years? Because we do need to preserve what's unique And what's special about this place, what's drawn all of us here, whether it was 100 years ago or in my case 3 years ago, right? But I've been familiar with Cold Spring for 20 years. I mean, I'll say it now because we're at the end of the thing. I've been a kayaker for 25, right? So I know the village, I know the Hudson Valley, and this really is a unique place relative to other places in the Hudson Valley. But in order to maintain that quality of life, in order to make it viable going forward, we need to make some changes. We need to make some investments, and we need to make some decisions. And the culture here really hasn't lent itself to that over the last several years. So going back to my job interview analogy, you have to really ask yourself, who do you believe can most effectively manage your affairs? Who do you have confidence in that's going to be able to identify an issue, identify a problem, do the research, find out what the best practices are, bring the information to the residents, to the voters, and say, look, here's the problem, here's what we can do, here's the upside, here's the downside, what do you think? Let's go. Make a decision, right? That's what we're talking about here, right? And quite honestly, you have to hold, and that's what it's all about. You've heard it mentioned a few times before, accountability. You have to hold your village government accountable, right? Because quite honestly, you heard, I worked on Catherine and Michael's campaign last year. I worked with Ralph, right? I thought things were going to be in a position where maybe we were going to go to the next level and things were going to improve, and it's sputtered, right? We need to get more people involved. We need to get more people energized. We have to have a plan. We have to have common goals. We have to hold people accountable. We have to get people excited. We have to get people involved, right? And we're not going to be able to do that unless we have competent, experienced leadership. Thank you, and I hope you'll consider me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. On behalf of Philipstown.Info, I first want to thank the audience for your patience, your attentiveness, and your silence. The job of mayor pays just a tad more than $1 million a minute. I was thinking of the capital projects. Pays about $1,000 a month. For all that you've both talked about tonight, I'm sure you'll earn that, whichever one gets elected. I want to thank you for stepping up and offering your services and for participating tonight. Thank you and good night.